You sit down. Finally, the dishes are done. The emails are answered. The thing you've been putting off all week is handled. You lower yourself onto the couch, close your eyes for a second, and then, almost immediately, something shifts. Quiet yunesu, a low hum of wrongness. Like you're forgetting something. Like you're doing something you're not supposed to be doing. You reach for your phone. You start mentally listing what you could be doing instead. And even though your body is horizontal and technically still, your mind is already standing up, pacing, bracing. It looks like restlessness. But it's actually something much older than that, because here's what nobody really asks. Why does rest feel like a threat? Before we go anywhere, I want to say something important. If you recognized yourself in those first few sentences, if rest genuinely makes you anxious, if stillness makes you feel vaguely guilty, if you can't remember the last time you did nothing without feeling like you were failing at something, that doesn't mean you're broken. It doesn't mean you're neurotic or dramatic or weak. It means your nervous system learned something. It means somewhere along the way, your mind built a very logical, very reasonable map of the world. And on that map, rest was marked as dangerous. That's not a character flaw. That's an adaptation. And tonight, we're going to look at exactly how that map got drawn. There's a specific moment that people who feel guilty for resting all seem to know. It's not when they're busy. It's not when they're overwhelmed. It's the moment right after. The moment the pressure lifts and the silence comes in. That moment. That's when it gets complicated. You'd think relief would be the natural response to finishing something hard. And sometimes there's a flash of it, but it's followed almost immediately by a kind of low-grade alarm, an itchiness. A need to justify the stillness before it's even had a chance to settle. Psychologically, what's happening here has to do with how the nervous system processes threat. And for a lot of people, especially those who grew up in environments that were unpredictable, demanding, or emotionally conditional, busyness wasn't just a schedule. It was a survival strategy. When you're busy, you're legible. You're productive. You're justifiable. You exist in a way that other people can see and approve of. But when you stop, when you sit down and do nothing, that's when you become vulnerable to a very old and very specific kind of fear. The fear that your worth is contingent, that you are only as valuable as what you're currently producing. Think about the households some of us grew up in, where the unspoken rule was that idle hands were a problem, where rest was something you earned, not something you were entitled to, where a parent's love or approval was given in response to effort, achievement, completion. You cleaned your room before you could go play. You finished your homework before you could watch TV. The message, repeated so many times it became cellular, was this: you must do before you can be. And that lesson doesn't stay in childhood. It follows you. It moves into your apartment. It sits next to you on the couch. Here's another layer, and this one is quieter, so it tends to go unnoticed for a long time. For many people, busyness isn't just productive. It's protective. It's a way of never having to fully arrive in the present moment. Because the present moment, when you're still and quiet and there's nothing to do, can be a surprisingly uncomfortable place to live. This is where avoidance enters the picture. Not the obvious kind of avoidance, where you know exactly what you're running from. The subtle kind. The kind where you're not even consciously aware that movement is keeping something at bay. That if you stopped long enough, something might surface. A feeling you haven't processed. A fear you haven't named. A grief that's been waiting patiently for a quiet Tuesday afternoon. Busyness is extraordinarily good at this. It fills every available gap. It makes sure there's always noise, always momentum, always a next thing. And as long as there's a next thing, you never have to sit with whatever is underneath the doing. The guilt people feel when they rest isn't always about productivity. Sometimes it's the guilt of nearly stopping. The mind, sensing that stillness might bring something up, creates urgency out of thin air. Suddenly, the closet needs organizing. Suddenly you should really respond to that message. Suddenly, the idea of just sitting here, breathing, doing nothing, feels almost unbearable. And the tragic thing is that this pattern can look, from the outside, like ambition, like drive, like someone who really has their life together, when really it's someone whose nervous system never quite learned that it was safe to stop. But here's the part nobody talks about. The guilt isn't random. It's targeted. It has a very specific internal logic. And that logic usually sounds something like this. Rest is something you have to justify to someone, even if that someone no longer exists in your daily life, even if you live alone, even if no one is watching. This is the internalized critic, the voice that sounds like a parent, a teacher, a coach, an older sibling, whoever first taught you that your value was conditional. Over time, that voice becomes so deeply embedded that it starts to sound like your own thoughts, like your own conscience, like the truth. And so you rest, and the voice says, shouldn't you be doing something? And you feel guilty. And the guilt feels like information, like a signal that you actually are doing something wrong. So you get up. You do the thing. You earn the rest you were already taking. And the voice goes quiet. And you learn. One more time. That motion is what keeps the discomfort away. This is a cycle. And the reason it's so hard to break isn't willpower or discipline it's that. The cycle works. It reliably reduces anxiety. It gives you a sense of control. It produces things you can point to. The strategy, however exhausting, is successful. And the nervous system remembers successful. Let's talk about identity. Because for a lot of people, the difficulty with rest isn't just about worth or fear or avoidance. It's about who they are. There's a particular kind of person, maybe you know one, maybe you are one, for whom being busy is not just a state. It's a self-concept. They describe themselves as someone who's always got a lot going on. Their productivity is part of how they move through the world. It's in how they talk about their weeks, what they're proud of, how they connect with other people. Busyness is social currency, yes, but it's also identity currency. It's the answer to the question, who am I? Which means that rest doesn't just feel unproductive. It feels disorienting, like briefly losing the thread of yourself. If I'm not doing, then what am I? If I'm not moving toward something, then what is this? Who is sitting here? These aren't dramatic questions. They're just uncomfortable ones. And that discomfort is what the guilt is masking. Because guilt is at least a familiar feeling. Guilt gives you something to do, even if that thing is simply feeling bad about what you're currently doing. It keeps the internal conversation going. It keeps you, in some strange way, engaged with yourself. The alternative, pure, unstructured stillness with no commentary, no guilt, no urgency. That's the unfamiliar part. That's the part that feels, to a nervous system that has never fully trusted it, like falling. Now here's something that tends to change how people see this pattern entirely once they see it. Think about what it felt like to be 16 and to have a Saturday with nothing in it. For some people, that was joy. Unscheduled time was freedom. But for others, maybe for you, even then, even that, young, there was something uncomfortable about too much open space. Maybe you filled it quickly. Maybe you felt vaguely guilty if you read all day. Maybe you had a parent who would find you resting and say something, even well-meaning, even offhand, that stuck. You look lazy. Don't you have something to do? We didn't raise you to just sit around. It doesn't have to have been cruel. It just has to have been consistent. By 25, that discomfort is more sophisticated. Now it's wrapped in ambition language. I can't slow down right now. There's too much to build. I'll rest when I've earned it. I'll take a break after this project. The guilt has found more respectable clothes to wear. It looks like discipline. It feels like responsibility. It sounds like someone who's going places. By 40, something shifts again. Some people hit a point where the body starts making decisions the mind wasn't willing to make, where rest stops being optional and becomes forced by exhaustion, by illness, by circumstance. And in that forced stillness, some people meet the guilt they've been outrunning for decades. And it's enormous. Not because they failed, but because the habit of motion ran so deep that stopping feels, even now, like a kind of self-betrayal. The behavior is the same across all three moments, but what it means keeps changing. At 16, it's compliance. At 25, it's ambition. At 40, it's survival. The same pattern, wearing different names. What rest actually requires, and this is the part that often goes unsaid, is a degree of emotional tolerance that not everyone has been taught to develop. Rest requires you to be present with yourself, without distraction, without purpose, without forward movement. And being present with yourself, if you've never been taught that you are safe company, can feel genuinely threatening. The nervous system of a person who feels guilty for resting is often a nervous system that never quite learned to come down, that spent years in a state of readiness, ready to perform, ready to respond, ready to earn its place, and now doesn't quite know what to do with stillness. Because stillness, in that older context, wasn't safe. Stillness meant you might be caught doing nothing, might be evaluated and found wanting, might lose the approval that was always subtly conditional. So the nervous system does what it was trained to do. It generates urgency. It manufactures discomfort. It creates guilt as a kind of internal alarm system. Get up, keep moving, stay legible, stay worthy. And here's the strange tenderness in that. It's trying to protect you even now, even when the original threat is long gone. The nervous system is doing its job. It's keeping watch. It's making sure you don't fall behind. It's the part of you that learned very early that being still could cost you something. That's not dysfunction. That's loyalty. There's a metaphor that captures this better than most clinical language. Imagine a house where the lights were never turned off. Not because anyone was afraid of the dark, exactly, but because leaving the lights on became, over time, just what you did. And after enough years, the idea of turning them off started to feel strange, a little unsafe. Like something might happen in the dark that you wouldn't be able to see coming. The lights, in this metaphor, are busyness, urgency, motion. They're not there because anything bad is actually happening. They're there because at some point, keeping them on felt like the responsible thing to do, and the habit calcified. And now, you don't even question it. You just keep them on. Rest is the act of reaching for the switch, and the guilt is the voice that says, "Are you sure? What if something happens? What if you need to be ready?" And the answer that the nervous system has been giving for years is, better leave them on, just to be safe. There's one more thing worth sitting with. Some people feel guilty for resting, not because of what rest might cost them in productivity, but because of what rest says about them in relation to others. If the people you grew up around were always working, always striving, always carrying something heavy, and you stop, you might feel, on some level, like you've abandoned them. Like you've opted out of a shared suffering that everyone else is still inside. Like your ease is a kind of This is generational. It's cultural. It runs through families like water through rock, slowly, invisibly, but leaving marks. The parent who never rested. The grandparent who survived something that required constant movement just to get through. The household where rest was a luxury nobody could afford. And you, now, with your comfortable couch and your free Saturday, feeling vaguely guilty about it all. Not because you did anything wrong, but because ease can feel like a betrayal of the people who never had it. And there's grief in that. Actually, a complicated, quiet kind of grief. Not for yourself, but for them. For the rest they never got. For the stillness that was never safe for them either. So what does it mean, at the end of all this? To feel guilty for resting? It means you learned something powerful and early about what you had to do to be okay in the world. It means your nervous system built a system that worked, that kept you moving, kept you producing, kept you safe in the particular way that was available to you. It means you are a person who internalized the rules of your environment so thoroughly that you began to enforce them on yourself, long after the environment changed. It doesn't mean you're incapable of rest. It doesn't mean you'll always feel this way. It doesn't mean there's something fundamentally wrong with the way you're wired. It means you're human in the most specific, traceable, understandable way. A human who learned under particular conditions that stillness carried risk, and who is still, on some level, honoring those conditions. Even now, you don't have to fix that tonight. You don't have to dismantle anything or practice anything or commit to anything. You can just notice it. You can just sit with the knowledge that the guilt makes sense, that it was never irrational, that it was always, in its own strange way, trying to take care of you, and maybe that's enough for right now. The lights don't have to go off all at once. You can just notice that you're holding the switch